You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Cry Oneness. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It is the hour of Divine Mercy, and this is the special Cry Oneness show. We have two very famous musicians with us today and a producer of a video done on the two musicians' lives, and it should be a very interesting show, and that's all I'm going to say for now, and then I'm going to introduce the people, and they'll all tell their little story, because these resumes that I've been looking at are amazing. The amount of work that these men have put into their musical careers, and I'm going to let everybody do a little bio of their own to start. We have three people, and for the first 15 minutes, we're going to focus on finding out a little bit about these people, because as you know, my show is about sharing your music, sharing your poetry, sharing your lives, and these people are 100% for all of those things. So I'm very honored to be interviewing Charles and Cristina, the producer, and Christopher. Christopher and Charles are the musicians, and Cristina is the producer of this amazing video I watched, which is called Concerto. So I'm going to start with Cristina, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'd be very interested if you have any little God moments you'd like to show where you know it was God and not you doing something. But other than that, just introduce yourself and what you do.
I'm Cristina Cassidy. I was a video producer for several years in Washington, D.C. area. And I grew up with Charles and Christopher. And I stayed in touch for a while after I moved up to Washington when I was in 8th grade. We were all in school together in an orchestra. As I like to say, I was second violin, probably last chair, and they were always the top bananas. They were concertmaster and principal cellist of all the orchestras we were in junior high. And I had the good fortune of knowing them both and playing music with them and actually meeting their father, who is one of the main characters in my documentary. I reconnected with Charles quite by accident in 1985 when I was watching a broadcast of the New York Philharmonic. I consider that a God moment, because I was sitting there very pregnant with my first baby, and I'm watching, and this very handsome young man walked out and sat down, and he was the associate concertmaster. And I went, my goodness, what a nice looking young man. And I was listening, and he picked up his violin, and I screamed, because I sat across from Charles for years in orchestra. And I knew it was him right away. And I just screamed. I went to the phone soon after the concert, called the New York Philharmonic, and I got Charles. And two people had called him that day. He'll tell you about that. I called him, and he got another funny call that day from that broadcast. Anyway, go forward a little bit. I kind of chased him for a long time after I became a documentary maker. I wanted to make a little film about the two brothers. I thought that would be so nice. I was just starting my documentary work, and I thought a nice short 20-minute film on these two guys. And so I chased them for quite a while, and it never worked out. It never, the stars did not align. And so I just kept at it. And finally, in 2008, they were doing a concert with the South Dakota Symphony Orchestra, and their father's music was part of the program. And I thought, how nice. That'll be great. I'll make my little 20-minute film. And then I had another God moment, because I went down to Atlanta to interview Christopher. And that's when he told me the part of the story about, the riveting moment he had with his father, the moment of truth, shall we say. And I went, uh-oh, this is not just a little document, a little 20-minute short. This could turn into something bigger. And I knew that there was going to be a story here. So when I went up to New York and interviewed Charles, he told the parallel story of what had happened to him in college with his father, which was also a very traumatic experience. And I looked at this and I said, we've got a story here that's very powerful. And the whole idea of the concerto, it's called concerto. The concerto, and you both can correct me as musicians, but my understanding was a double concerto is two instruments doing their, music to each other, and then there's the orchestra in the background. And that to me characterized the story beautifully. Here's one brother and another brother, and they're, playing the two instruments, and then there's the big orchestra in the background, which reminded me of the father, the imposing father in the background. So that was part of the reason for the choosing that. And also they played a double concerto with the South Dakota Symphony Orchestra. It was the Paulus.
Right. And the camera goes to me for a second. That's the photo I have up behind me. It's the two brothers playing in a concert.
Yes, that was the original, one of the original performances in 1996. They did I can let them tell you more about that, but they did a concert together. They actually, it's a long story, so I'll let them tell it if they want, but they ended up having both orchestras commissioned Paulus, the composer Paulus, the American composer, to write a piece for them, and they performed it with the New York Philharmonic and with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and it was rave reviews from both. And that they were recreating that in South Dakota. But it's been a real God odyssey the whole way. It's been a very spiritual experience. I think it was for all of us. It certainly was for me. It took many years to make this film, and that was okay. It took the time it needed to take to be made. As you said, you said before the broadcast started, right. The Holy Spirit was on this one, as far as I'm concerned.
He's always lurking around, not lurking, but right. So, how long have you been doing this career in production?
I started as a writer many years ago, and then in 1995, I became a script writer for a small production firm in Northern Virginia, and I eventually became head script writer, and then I became a producer. And I decided when I left there in 2007 and came to Charlotte, I now live in Indian Land, South Carolina, right outside of Charlotte, that I wanted to make this story, this small film that I was going to make. So I decided to start my own company, and every penny I made was made as a producer. I started doing regular producing work here, went into making this film.
So a little bit more about this film. I've been doing some research on the film itself. I see it's been on some film festivals, and you're trying to get it awards and stuff. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on with what's the future of this film. I know you've been marketing to specific groups, and it's copy protected, but do you have any intentions in the future?
Oh, I would love to get this on, my goal is to get it on Netflix. Right now, I'm trying to raise money to get something called E&O insurance, which is errors and omissions insurance that films need. And it's very, very expensive. So that's also, that and COVID have held us back a bit, because I was on the verge of the fundraising when all of this hit. And also film festivals aren't happening right now. But we have gotten several awards. We premiered at the Atlanta International Film Festival. We got a standing ovation. We did not win an award in that, but I've never seen anybody get a standing ovation at a film festival that way. And I was really quite amazed, and it really touched people's hearts. And then I was nominated as for a Best Director category at the International Madrid Film Festival. I did not win, but I was nominated. Then we won Best Documentary and Best Film of the Festival at the it's Classical Arts Film Festival in California. So we did really well there. And then we won at another festival in New York called the International, I think it's the International New York Film Festival or the New York International Festival. I always get it confused, but we won Best Documentary. So everywhere it's played, it's gotten incredible response from people.
Well, my response is incredible too. I told you, and I want to say it in front of the brothers, I had an amazing increase in the amount of healing I had in forgiving my own father after viewing it. And my father was in World War II on a ship that was bombed by kamikazes, and we had a rough time when I was growing up, and I think it was because I was so much like my father, to be honest with you. We didn't rub the right way, but I had emotional issues, a lazy eye, and my father wanted me to man up. So I had some difficulties, but I always loved my father, and I know now that the hard time my father gave me was kind of necessary to make me who I am today. And that's exactly what this film substantiated with me in my spirit. And I thank you all for putting it together. And if you ever need an endorsement, let me know.
Thank you.
Who would like to go next, Christopher or Charles? Let's see.
Let Charlie go next.
Charlie?
Hi. Yes.
Okay, so Charlie, it was great talking to you on the phones a couple of times. I really identified with both you and your brother because of what happened in my life. And it's funny how wounds tend to bring people together. And
Right.
so I'd like you to share something about the positive stuff that's going on in your lives right now before we go back and start talking about your father's poetry and everything. Tell me a little bit about what you're happiest about in your life. What really stands out as being a moment where you really felt overjoyed with what you did?
Well, I think it would have to be some of the happiest years I ever had was when I first got out of school. I had a full scholarship to Florida State University, where I studied with a great teacher, Richard Bergen, who was a concertmaster and associate conductor of the Boston Symphony for over 40 years.
Uh-huh.
And immediately after that, I joined the Philadelphia Orchestra, where I was for 8 years. And then I became associate concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic under Maestros Zubmeda and Leonard Bernstein. And I was also a guest concertmaster of the London Symphony for a tour of England. And then after that, I was doing a lot of recording and solo work. I ended up relinquishing my chair after 19 years. I went right into the first violin section, which had less responsibility, so that I could take off when I needed to. And I retired in 2017 from the New York Philharmonic.
Uh-huh.
And I became the chair and professor of music history at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And that's where I still am. And so that was kind of my life in a nutshell right there. So after all those years of performing, it was interesting to take all of that 45 years of experience with music and get it into some sort of chronological order in order to teach it as music history. So I have really enjoyed doing that. I must say, when Cristina first approached me about doing the documentary, I kind of hemmed and hawed, and I wasn't really sure because
6 years with here, right?
My father was a very troubled man, understandably so in a way. He had polio when he was 3 years old, and his legs ended up completely paralyzed, and he was also partially paralyzed in his right hand. But he was gifted with a lot of intelligence, but back in those days, we're talking early 1900s. He was born in 1909. There was nothing done for handicapped children in the way of education, so he was self-taught. But he had a marvelous intellect and tremendous musical gifts, and he became a baritone starting at the age of 18. He studied with Dadman, who was a tremendous vocal teacher, and he became a soloist with the NBC Red Radio Network, with the Travelers Insurance Orchestra, and in 1935 he moved to New York and studied there with Alfredo Martino, another great teacher. But he also was very interested in poetry, and he wrote his first poem when he was 18 with no previous education. And he sometimes would go for periods of time when he would write a poem a day. And his favorite form in which to work was the sonnet. But he wrote other things, subjects of love, death, sometimes his own death. He would sometimes combine the two. Also, he would write miniature portraits of other people. Nature was a favorite thing of his. And he would also write religious poetry, sometimes contradictory standpoints.
Right.
But the problem with having had all this problems with his health, the polio also left him with a double curvature of the spine. He was often in great pain, and but he had a problem with getting along with people. He would, in an effort to control the circumstances around him, he could be very abrasive. And when he ended up having a family, I don't remember too much of my father talking to us below 110 decibels. I mean, it was quite. He had real anger problems, and we can talk about that a little later as to how that manifested itself.
Right.
But it was as if he was two men, because the poetry that he wrote and the music, he was also a composer. He ultimately did go to college and graduated with the highest honors from Rollins College.
Right.
And some of his music is very touching, as his poetry is as well. And but it was almost as if he was two men. The man that wrote the poetry and the music was not the man that I knew as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So this putting together this poetry book that we're going to talk about sometime later has been something, my trying to get to know the man that I did not know as a child growing up.
What made you decide to put his poetry together and publish it despite all the problems you had with him?
It was a way of honoring my father in a way, the things that he could do, because the farther away I got from him after his death, though I must say I still occasionally have a nightmare about him, the more I wanted to know the man that I did not know as a child growing up. And you see that sometimes in the music and in the poetry. So that's part of why I did that. And also because I did want to honor the good things my father could do.
That's great, Charles. In form of God moments, I like to share a little bit about myself personally. this is a God moment in my mind. You know, I started writing poetry in 2008. I was in a room with a meeting, and I just said, I wonder if I could write poetry. And within 2 seconds, my first poem came out. But my most recent poem that I wrote, I'd like to share with you guys, is something that I think is kind of all about what we're talking about. This is my perspective on God right now. It's called One Bites Many, and bytes is like gigabyte on a computer. We are one of trillions and trillions of pieces and faces of the Creator's great love in action. Objects and subjects complementing the universe, imitating and desecrating, praying and cursing, loving and leaving, feasting and starving, grateful to live, but destined to fade away with time, precious but expendable, competing for affection or in rare precious moments, just happy to be. In the end, we're all just one of many portrait pictures from a vast series of great and sometimes not so great photo opportunities, eventually carefully packed up and stored in one of the Creator's old photo albums, sorted in descending order by the number of good deeds done, pending quality control checks and final distribution. I doubt that God has computerized this process because he doesn't want to lose his job to a machine. He's also a little jealous of Siri and surely hates at least one apple for the trouble it's caused mankind. So that's my poetry. And when I read your father's poetry, I was deeply moved by the emotions in it. And I saw what's in my poem, the constant, we're always here and there, never there, you know, we're just, it's a constant like struggle. Good and bad things happen, but somehow miraculously we all survive and get through it. And that's my current belief. And also the God moment I experienced, you're sharing about Rollins College, and my sister's son just graduated from there 3 years ago, and now he's married. And I wrote my second poem on the campus of Rollins College. So that in my mind is a God moment. Okay, so Christopher, would you like to share now?
Yes, it's my perspective is a little. I don't know if you can hear me with the road noise.
Hear you fine.
Okay. My perspective is a little bit different than Charlie's. Charlie was the firstborn, and there's a large part of Charlie that's the dutiful son. And I was the secondborn, and I was the fighter. And my father really was into control. Perhaps because of his handicap, he wanted to feel like he controlled people around him and events, and I rebelled against that. So a large part of me is still fighting that control, because when you're brought up that way, very young, and he was a God image, really, he wanted to be a God image to us. And so for me, when I felt interaction with the real God, our Father in heaven, it was very uplifting to me to know that I was accepted for who I was and not for what someone else wanted me to be. But part of me still puts my father's personality into God, and I have to fight that a lot, you know. So, but, you know, I'm glad that Charlie has put together the poetry, and we've both been involved in performances of his music. He never really followed through on a lot of his talent. I mean, Charlie and I have talent, but we went to work every day, or every day that we were supposed to anyway, for 40, 50 years. But my father didn't have that stick-to-itiveness. Somehow in him he felt he deserved adulation just for being talented, and that people would realize that. But the few things that he did do, some of them are very moving and very beautiful.
Yes, and what about your background in the music business, in the concert What have you done that you really enjoy doing your works? I know you're involved with the festival down there in Atlanta every year. Do you have any other things that really move you?
When I was made to start the cello because I wanted a family string quartet, but it never really captured. I wanted to be a painter, and but when I was 15, finally, something I started to identify with the music, and that's when I left my father and started studying at Curtis and Juilliard, and then with Charlie in the Philadelphia Orchestra in New York, and then principal in Atlanta. But when I was in Atlanta, I also went to art school the same time as in the symphony full time. And then I got my throat cancer and had to drop out, and then my son was born. So I stopped really painting for a long time, and we had bought a vacation property in Amelia Island, Florida. And it's a beautiful little town, Fernandina Beach, and I decided it'd be a great place to start a chamber music festival. So that next year will be our 20th season now, and from the very beginning we've had the world's greatest artists and people that I knew from Curtis and Juilliard and the symphony helped me get it started. People like Lynn Harrell and the Glen String Quartet, Hilary Hahn, they all came from the very beginning. So I'm still doing that, and even though I'm retired from the symphony, I'm still playing some. I have a little arthritis in my hands now, so it's a little painful, but I'm still able to play, and I enjoy that a lot. And it's a real challenge to get the festival, trying to get the festival back online during this pandemic. That's what's sort of occupying my time right now, is trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's so challenging with the loss of audiences being live. It's a little difficult.
Right. We're probably going to have to postpone some of the big names and then do small live concerts coupled with virtual live stream, so that we can get keep the group gathering down, those numbers down, but still get out to the public. And we may be with virtual. We actually may expand our audiences because we feel that perhaps some people don't go to concerts and they don't like to dress up or into that stuffy chamber music stuff. But online, they can be at home and relax and view some of it or part of it and get up and go get something out of the fridge. And so we're experimenting with that. And I've done 4 virtual live stream concerts at this point, and we've been very happy with the results.
I have a question for you. You and your brother are so highly rated as soloists in addition to being in concerts. And I'm wondering, what do you enjoy more, organizing or playing?
Playing, for sure. I don't really enjoy organizing that much, but I do. In organizing, the good part of it is interacting with the other artists and talking to them and planning the programs. And I've also met a lot of wonderful people that are during their time to be on the
Okay, we just have Chris, give it a couple of seconds. We got a problem with this.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay.
It's just I'm on the road, so my hotspot goes in and out a little bit.
Okay, so sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk to somebody else until my internet's stable?
Well, you're okay now. It's going to fluctuate.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
So why don't we continue? I would like to ask you, I was very emotionally, concerned with that gun incident. Would you like to? What was that? What made you leave your home? Right, was a gun incident. Would you like to go into that a little bit, or just let it be?
Well, I don't know a little bit. It's not something I like to dwell on, but the gun incident was not the thing that made me leave. It was because I was was going to leave with my mother that my father decided to scare me and see if I would change my mind by threatening to shoot me. The gun wasn't loaded, but when you're 2 feet away from somebody aiming a pistol at you, that had always told you never to aim a pistol at anybody even if you thought it wasn't loaded. It was a pretty traumatic event, but it just sort of cemented my resolve at that point that he was not a person I really wanted to be around a lot, and that's why I left. But eventually we sort of made our peace when we got the Philadelphia Orchestra and moved him to Springfield. We would be able to get together. He wasn't able to control me anymore, and so I was able to somehow communicate on better terms.
Yeah, I totally identify with you on those control things, and it's amazing. Have you been able to come close to forgiving your father? I know you were talking on the video about being less angry. Have you come to a point of forgiveness?
Oh, yeah, I forgive my father. As Charlie said, he had a lot of difficulties, and there's a certain amount of mental illness and narcissism brought on by a lot of things, and he also had a lot of good qualities and gave me a lot of good things as a father. I mean, even though he tried to control us as musicians, he taught us a lot, and I'm sure I would not have made the career without his influence. So, yes, I have forgiven him. I don't, fortunately, every once in a while I have a dream about him, but it's not usually antagonism. It's usually just communicating with him or something.
Yeah, it took me 5 years after I quit drinking to forgive my father. It was very difficult for me, and I totally identified with what you went through. And how I finally wound up doing it was, I looked at it. I actually became a worse drinker than my father for a period of time. That helped me. You didn't have to go through that part of it, I guess. But the other thing that helped me was my father was in World War II, and he was only 17 years old, and he was bombed by 3 kamikazes, and everybody that he was with in the electrical room where he was working, all his friends were gone, and he was almost thrown overboard for being dead. So I started looking at things like that and understanding that we all have this human condition, and the most important thing is to be able to forgive people. And I went down to Orlando to a conference called Unbound with Neil Lozano, and I was trying to forgive my father and having a difficult time with it. And I was actually still on the medication I was on, that I was put on at age 12 because of his drinking. And I went up to these prayer warriors, and 3 people prayed over me, and they said, "What do you want us to pray for?" And I said, I want you to pray that I forgive my father, but I don't think I can. And they said to me, "You have to." I said, "Why do I have to?" And they said, "Because God is a father, and if you don't forgive your father, you can't have the proper relationship with the Father." And then when they laid hands on me, I got slain in the spirit for 10 minutes. I was in ecstasy. I couldn't even move off the floor after I did it. And forgiveness, and the week after that happened, I wound up coming off the medication I was on for 55 years for his drinking. So forgiveness is powerful, and I'm so glad you're able to do it. It's so amazing. How about you, Charles? Are you at a level of... You were a caregiver for your father, and I was a caregiver for my mother. I think that's amazing,
Yes, for many things, I'm very grateful for my father. He gave me a love of Shakespeare, for example. But there are other things. For example, I started to lose the concept of hope under my father. It seemed like the more I wanted something, it was like the more control he had over whether or not I would get it. If there was a music competition that I wanted to go to, I remember in high school several times, I was never sure up until the last minute whether or not he would allow me to go. That kind of control. And finally, I had my own experience with my father. The final thing was my 21st birthday present was that although I was up at Florida State University, and I had moved my father up to his own apartment up near where I was so that I could watch over him, even though I was in school. For my 21st birthday, there was a knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was a policeman. And he said, you need to come with me. There's been a shooting at your father's apartment. And I said, what happened? He said, I think you better come with me. So I followed him in my car. He took me to the hospital. And my father had an old German Luger that was given to him by a friend of his from World War II. And he had used it to shoot himself in the chest. And he missed his heart by about that much. And so I was in the emergency room with him, and he was saying, I did it for you. And all I could think of in my mind was, no, you didn't do it for me. It was the ultimate guilt trip. I knew precisely why he did it, because that was the time when I was going to have to start looking for a job. And, major cities or major orchestras are in major cities. And so we were talking one of the big cities, I'd have to move north. And my job apparently was that I was to spend the rest of my life taking care of him. Well, that just couldn't happen. So as my brother said, we managed to get him to Springfield, his hometown, where he still had relatives. And we got him into a situation where he was cared for. But then he had a stroke while he was up there, and then he passed away within the year. So, it was, that was just a very troubling time. It was when I found out that with my own emotions, when a tragic moment happens, my emotions shut down. I became, when I saw my father there, I was in the room and I helped, and I just, but it was interesting, I just didn't feel anything. It wasn't until later that I felt the horror of what he had done to himself. And that's in moments of tragedy, that's funny. My emotional reaction is that I shut down my emotions so that I can take responsibility. That's just the way it worked out.
Yeah. I had a little story about something similar. I was in Vero Beach, Florida for a year. I wound up, I couldn't take the heat down there and moved back to Connecticut, but I was sitting by the pool, and there was a woman and a fireman down, and the fireman's wife was sitting by the poolside, and I was laying in a chair, and I didn't even know her, but she was saying, I can't take this anymore. I can't take this anymore. And I said, can't take what? It got a little nosy. She said, I can't take it anymore. My sister. I said, your sister's here with you? No, my sister. She killed herself, and I cannot forgive her. And I said, wow. And I had just done a presentation at St. Helens Prayer Group on my salvation story. And I called my spiritual advisor to see if I could help this woman. And he said, Joe, read her your story. And I did, because I have a bottle of pills and I almost killed myself. And that was in my story. And that was just before, just after my mother was taking care of her with Alzheimer's. I was my parents' caregivers for my whole life. I was codependent in addition to everything else. And I almost offed myself. So I read my story to her. And she went up to her room, and she said, I can't do anything. I can't go to church. I can't receive communion. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't forgive her. I can't forgive her. So I shared my story, and she didn't say anything, and she left. And at that day, I got moved by the Spirit to write a poem, and the poem was, write this and put it under her door. Heart of my heart, window of my spirit. Forgiveness owes no penance now. Forgiveness owes no penance now. Follow him through deep oceans of peace to warm shoulders of love. And I scribbled it down on a piece of paper and put it under her door. 2 days later, she came down, and she said she went back to church and she had forgiven her sister. This is the wounded healer concept. You know, when you have wounds that somebody else has, or when you share a story that helps somebody be free, that's how the Holy Spirit works, I think. But you need to have the same malady to help the person. That's my belief. Sorry to interrupt, but that just came to me.
Oh.
This is a spiritual show, so...
May I comment on that, Joe?
Sure. Anybody.
I just want to say... Yeah. I just want to say that one of the powerful things for my involvement in this, first of all, so grateful that these two incredible men opened up their life to me and hence many other people. And secondly, the thing that's really amazing for me, every time the film is viewed at film festival or fundraiser, the amount of people who come up and talk about what you're talking about, that they had either a father or a mother or a sister or a husband. I've had many women come up and talk about, from Betty's viewpoint. Betty was Charles and Chris's mother, and what she went through with their dad and the emotional abuse. I have so many people come up to me and talk about it and how this has touched their lives and how much they appreciate that, as you said, that they were able to see this film and these people's lives. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a very powerful testimony to you know, and I think Charlie and Chris may speak to this too. They really, if I'm not mistaken, you guys can correct me, you really hadn't talked about all of this much over the years.
Not really. We didn't talk about it. It was something. Chris and I very rarely talked about it, and I wasn't, as you know, I wasn't really anxious to do the documentary. I had trouble enough with the nightmares of my father that I did. Many people, psychological abuse can be just as hurtful as actual physical abuse.
Amen.
And this was, it was a real problem. It was a real problem for me to even admit it sometimes to myself that I was being abused, but it was what was happening.
Yeah, it was like a family dirty laundry kind of thing. You didn't want to air it in public much, but and I don't even know, Cristina, maybe it was a God moment. I don't even know why I started talking about all of it with you. It just sort of happened. You know, I didn't plan on it, but I think part of it was the questions you asked were just made me open up or think about things. But, you know, talking about my mother, when, you know, it was psychological abuse. She was treated like one of the kids, basically. But, and I can't even go into the indignities that he put her through, but when she left him and she finally met an old boyfriend that she wanted to marry, she went to the divorce lawyer and talked to him, and he said, well, you have no grounds for a divorce, I'm sorry. And she told me that, and I was at Curtis, and I went right to Gettysburg. I took a bus and went to talk to the lawyer and told him what had gone on. She had pushed it all out of her mind and couldn't remember the bad things or couldn't face them, didn't even tell the lawyer what she had been through. So, I mean, talk about the effects of abuse and how to kind of push it out of your life. She went really, and she didn't like to talk about it much. The funny thing is that if we did mention it, a lot of times we focused on the funny moments in our, because there were fun times and joking, and we'd make, remember when Todd did this, remember when you did that or this. So it wasn't all bad, but as far as opening up, that was unexpected for me.
I can absolutely relate to that. That was what was my reaction as well. That what was interesting was, as we were making the documentary, the nightmares that I had about my father increased dramatically. Things that I hadn't thought about would come out at night. And as I said, that's been a problem with me. Number one, that this kind of, I had to be perfect, and number two, the idea that I didn't dare hope for something, because the more I hoped for something, the less likely it seemed to me that I was to get it. And things were constantly being held over my head as control mechanisms. And then, of course, after the family broke up and I had care of my father, for the first year, I had an old rusted out hulk of a car, and I would drive 200 miles home every weekend to spend with my father until it just became totally impractical, besides the old car I was giving out. And we moved him up to Tallahassee, where I was in school. But it was a very difficult time to balance schoolwork and trying to build a career and get ready for a career, I mean, and taking care of my father the way he expected to be taken care of, which was basically, for example, in high school, I was not allowed to go to high school more than 3 days a week. He kept me home 2 days a week. So, I mean, and yet I still managed to have 3.5 average. So it was a very difficult time. It's amazing how much, though, of that I have put out of my mind. I don't think about it, but they come out at night sometimes.
That's where I have my difficulties sometimes too. You know, I listen to this Richard Rohr quite a bit. He's a Franciscan down in Albuquerque, and he says, "What we don't transform, we transmit." And I know that's all that was going on with my father. He was just in such pain himself and didn't know how to deal with it. And he had 3 cardiac arrests in front of me. You know, my worst fear was the death of my parents, and every time they died, I was with them. This is how God works, you know. And God's the only one that can use evil for good. I got to remember that. And, you know, people aren't evil, but sometimes they act out because they just can't hold it in. I'm so glad that I've gotten my garbage out, or I'd still be sick, you know. So you guys, I really admire what you guys are doing with this video, because I think especially if it can be marketed to Netflix, you are going to help so many people like me. I mean, it's amazing what that did for me, just reviewing that video and knowing that I'm not alone.
You know, one thing that was very difficult with the film was not making the father out to be a total villain. And he dominated the film a lot for me. You know, it was very hard. And I also find it interesting that almost all of the home footage that we used was done by him. Many of the photographs were done by him. So in a way, he gave us the material to use in the film. There was a lot of ironies, but at the end, I really had compassion for him. It surprised me because, you know, I was listening to these stories and all of this, but I see that he was a broken person. We're all broken in our own ways, and we do what we know sometimes. And as you said, you know, we can all do things that we regret, but he was, you know, I think textbook narcissist, in spite of, you know, I mean, I don't think he became the way he was because he was a paraplegic particularly. I think that affected him deeply. But at the end, I think we come out with, Charlie said it in part of the interview when he said, I didn't know this man. I didn't know the man who did the poetry and the music. I just didn't know him. And so in a way, this poetry book and the music that both of the brothers have promoted and worked on helped see that man and see him in a different way. And that's been healing for me. And, you don't make art without having a certain piece of it be about you. And I'll never forget, I was sitting with Christopher in a diner in South Dakota. He may or may not remember this. And I was telling him about my story and my background. And I looked over and his mouth was like, and I was like, what? He goes, oh my gosh, that was so tough. And I said, but it's my story. It didn't seem that bad because it was my story. But, I too had a mother. Actually, my mother and their father met once, and they were peas in a pod. They got along so well. And I think I made this film about my mother, not my father, my mother. I mean, that there's that element of what I felt as well. So it was a powerful experience. I think it was powerful for all of us.
Yeah. What happened? It really makes you develop a very large ego too when you have something like that happen. You get to the point where you don't trust anybody, you hate authority, all kinds of stuff. But I'm over it, and you guys are doing very well. So maybe we should get into some of your father's poetry so that he can. His poetry is definitely beautiful, unless you guys want to keep talking on the same subject. But would you like to move on to the poetry aspect right now, or keep talking on the same line we're doing now?
I certainly have a few examples. The book itself will have about 200 of his poems.
I've read a lot of them.
So I have a few examples I can certainly read. Probably, the first one that I had published on my own was one called The Last Man. My father wrote a lot of sonnets. His poetry is going to be mostly in an older style because he wrote most of it in the 30s and 1930s and 1940s. So it's not what you would normally read today. But one of his favorite styles was the Venerable Sonnet. And I actually got a bit of fan mail from an English professor who was writing to the author when he read it. And he said, it's amazing because, the first 8 lines are one sentence. And he says, there are so few people who can use the English language like that. I felt sorry I had to tell him that person wrote that had died in 1973.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was this one, The Last Man. Restrained no more, the last rebelling man, alone as he had always wished to be, sole monarch of himself, with not a clan, nor tribe, nor state, nor nation left that he, protesting, must obey, has sat him down upon the last green acreage of sod, and woven of the pliant grass a crown to show the rotted dead that he is God. To show the dead his is the only face, his thought the only consciousness, his eye the only judge of substance or of space, his skull the only congruence with sky. And singing loud his praise, he spends his breath, extinguishing the universe in death. Very powerful poem. That was the first one I had published.
That's amazing. It's talking about pride and ego too, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Isn't it?
I think so. That's what I get out of it.
Yes.
Very good description of it. Anybody else want to comment on the poem?
I can come up with another poem. This is one of my favorites. There's a type of poetry called a cinquain. And a cinquain is, it's similar to haiku, where haiku will have 3 lines. The first one has 5 syllables, second line has 7 syllables, the third line has 5 syllables. And it doesn't rhyme, it's just you have a certain number of syllables to create a thought. Well, a cinquain is somewhat the same thing, idea. It's a 5-line poem. It has, the first line has 2 syllables, next line has 4, third line has 6, the fourth line has 8, and the last one goes back to 2. And this one combines, there are 4 cinquants in a row, and the last one has kind of a macabre surprise ending to it. And one of his favorite topics to write about was nature. And so here they are. It's a set of 4 cinquants. Rain is upon water like small silver hammers that play sweet fairy music on wavelets. The moon is a lovely lady whose train of clouds is held from the dust of earth by a star. Seagulls flying in the sunlight are foam flecks spewed from the tips of waves, maddened by the wind. Beneath the pale green sea are mermaids, pink coral, and dreamless men with seaweed in their hair.
Wow.
Little macabre surprise ending there. He was a good one for that. Every once in a while he'll throw in a poem like that.
That's amazing. What intelligence just to be able to do that with the count.
One of his favorite authors was O. Henry because of those surprise endings like that. I see that a lot in his poetry, like an O. Henry short story kind of.
Surprise ending. He was a handsome man too. I've got him behind me now on my screen. Can you see him?
Yeah. Yes.
I was surprised that he, I love his nature poems. Those were my favorite. The nature. It surprised me because the images I have of him are up in that room, closed away. I don't know. I didn't see him as a nature lover, you know, and it surprises me. I think I thought of him after I heard some of these poems of imagining him sitting there looking out of the window, you know, looking at nature, being aware of it. And it's very moving.
It just reminds me that in our high school year, before I left, when we were at school, he would have little hobbies, electronics or just all sorts of little things. And what he would do is get in his car, and he could drive, and he would go park in a place called, it was Mead Gardens. And he would spend a lot of his time in these gardens in his car as working on a project, but he really liked to be outside a lot.
Yeah.
I just thought of that.
I'm trying to find a poem here. I was talking about nature poem. Cristina was talking about nature poems. I'm trying to find one of his. Yes, here it is. One of his nature poems. It's called March and the Maiden. Loud march, wind shattered, tired with the fight. His garments tattered, stands aside for April, his hair awry. Blonde April with timid sighs, stepping daintily, raises tear-wet eyes. Foreseeing his wild look, she knows he is soon spent, and passes by, lifting her soft white skirt clear of winter's battleground. Giving her curls a toss and flirt, she dances off to a green-clad world, leaving poor ragged March to die. But I love his description of April there. For she raises tear-wet eyes, his way of saying April showers, you know.
Yeah, there's another one on rain. Cinquanus, you told me? Cinquanus, is it?
Yeah, I just read that. Yeah, that was the one I read.
But that was a haiku, yeah, okay.
Well, that's like haiku. Sometimes a slightly different arrangement.
Are you going to read the one on his grave?
Oh, yes.
That's
His most autobiographical poem.
That's what the book is named from, right?
Right. Now he had, for example, this is an example. He didn't. He had early in his life, he did not want to be pitied for his handicap.
Oh yeah.
And so when he was in the middle of a singing career, when he was a recitalist, he would have the curtains drawn closed before they would open up, and he would be by the piano, and he would have his crutches. He could walk. His legs had totally atrophied. They were literally nothing but bone with skin on them.
Polio from age 3, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the muscles were totally gone. But he had these gigantic steel braces that would keep his legs straight, and he could walk with crutches. But he would have the curtains drawn. He would be in the view of the piano, and he would support himself with his crutches hidden under that arm, and he would support himself. And the curtains would open, he'd bow, and then he would sing. And then at the end, he would take out his crutches, and of course the audience would just gasp at that moment as he walked off, because they hadn't given any hint that he had a handicap. But when he died, we had a closed casket, which was not the custom for the family, apparently. We took a lot of flack, but my father had once told me, well, actually told me more than once, he did not want an open casket when he died. So this might explain it. Listen to my song, gaze not upon me. My spirit long has broke these earthly chains. My soul has found at last a greener valley, and fetters not itself with human gains. My body broken would have tried to bind me, had not my mind reached out to nobler things. Now I am conscious of naught but beauty. Forgetting self, it is my soul that sings.
Beautiful.
And so It Is My Soul That Sings is not only the title of the poetry book, but we had that line inscribed on his tombstone.
That's amazing. Now, I understand from what I was watching, I hope I'm quoting this right, that your father came to some type of peace despite the fact that he died in a hotel room and somebody was helping him, that he found some peace towards the end of his life. Is that true?
That is true, yes.
How did that happen?
Well, it was...
He was all alone and he was at peace, right?
Well, it wasn't that he was alone. He was in Springfield, and he had relatives who were there. He came from a large family of 9 brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
So they visited him often. And when we would come up to visit him, I witnessed it myself that even the rift between my brother and he was starting to heal. I almost got the sense that he was actually a little proud of what we had accomplished, even though the idea was that he wanted to be known as our teacher and that he was responsible for us.
Yeah.
But in the end, he seemed to take a pride in what we had accomplished. And at that time, we had gotten into the Philadelphia Orchestra with the legendary Eugene Ormandy. But we hadn't even gone on to our bigger things, Chris becoming principal cellist of Atlanta, and I going on to be associate concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic.
You guys have had a beautiful journey, yeah.
I don't really remember his complimenting us much at all until that last year. And then he said something like he enjoyed watching us in the orchestra with Philadelphia on TV, and that he was proud of us. And really, that had never happened that I could remember before.
While we were young, he never said that. I never recall him saying he was proud. Sometimes he would, that's where I got my problem with perfectionism. Whatever I did was never good enough. I remember coming out after one concert, and he didn't say anything about how good it was. He criticized my mistakes. And there weren't many. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect performance.
Well, my father's the same way, and he was the same age as your father, and I'm the same age as you, Charles. So I'm wondering if it was just some of the old timers did that just to keep their kids in line, I guess. But I always hated authority from the time I was young.
I remember it always seemed that, for instance, when Charlie
we've lost him, but
was young. I think 13, like that. But the focus, my father ended up writing a cadenza, and in a way, that took the focus away from Charlie's accomplishment to show how wonderful my father's. In a way, it used my brother's abilities to focus on him because he wrote the cadenza. Or I remember when I played a Sassoon concerto at age 13, it was recorded, and some of the rehearsals were recorded, and it wasn't a perfect performance, and I've always just focused on the errors, but he took the tape and doctored it and put in rehearsal stuff, and then he would show me how great he made me look. That even though my performance was not so hot, after his editing, then did. There was a lot of that as we were growing up, and that seemed to disappear that last year.
Yeah, I have to say I had some fights with my father, but I loved him through everything. I mean, I was his caregiver too, and I wanted to share this with you guys. This is a locution I got, and I get locutions. I think they're from God. I don't know if they are, but I let people decide if they think it's God or not. I want to read this one to you. And when he gave me this, he says, "Tell everybody this is exactly the way I feel about them. Everybody, bad and good. My beloved child, mighty is my love for you, full of mercy, hope, and grace. Before the dawn of time I knew you. Your voice is music to my ears. When I gaze upon you, I see myself. Everything you do pleases me immensely. I call to you. I thirst for you. I bled for you. I die for you again. I feel your pains. I share your gains. I'm here for you, now and forever. Nothing can separate us except your will. We are one. Please accept me. Please don't leave me again. Very humbly yours, your beloved God."
interesting.
Amazing if we could all believe that, how much peace we'd have in the world right now.
One thing about their dad that I want to interject is that he may have been, I think, Charles, you mentioned that he had some anxiety, or he would antagonize people, or his personality. When I met him, I was a teenage girl, but he was bigger than life. And he was so charming. He could be so charming. But I'll never forget, he filled up a room. I mean, you were in the room with him, but you're kind of over here in the corner, and he's filling up the whole room. And I can't even imagine being a child of that. Well, yes, I can, because I had a mother like that. Actually, now that I think of it, my mother was very much like that. There was little room, but over the years, the forgiveness, the time, and I think that theme about in spite of or because of making this film, I was able to look at my mother and thank her for the art that she taught me about, the culture she gave me, the language. I'm bilingual because of her, the love for poetry, all of that I got from my mother. But it's the same with the sons, your love, your intellect, your love of language, your love of learning. And you said too, Chris, that you were a good teacher because of it, because you were taught incorrectly even. I mean, you became very concerned about that. So it's so fascinating to me that our pasts, are we in spite of or because of? And it's both.
We've been going about an hour and 15 minutes, I guess, so maybe we should have a closing prayer or closing poem of your choice, Charles.
Oh, why don't we close with
Just let me say, it's been a real pleasure interviewing you guys. I don't think I've ever been this close in spirit to any group of people I've ever been with, and I appreciate you being here today.
Well, I think I'd like to close with one of his love poems. And
great.
I have no idea why he wrote this. It's entitled Anniversary. is another sonnet. It is enough almost that you and I have loved and known the seasons of our years, have seen them all, the summer sun, the tears of spring, the vague unreal of chilling sky that half congealed in winter arches high at night above the rigid earth, our peers at dawn through frosty beetled brows, or nears the tops of trees at dusk as shadows die. And we have known far more than poets sing of tender looks and warm embraces too. But still, this fruit is not enough for such as we who seek a further blossoming. Why should the past suffice for me and you when all that can yet come is not too much?
Excellent way to end the show. And I want to thank you all for being here. Thank the Rex brothers, Charles and Christopher and Cristina Cassidy, their producer. I wish you luck with your show, and I pray that you get accepted by Netflix so that you can continue to help people like you've helped them already by distributing this great documentary. And good luck to you in your careers, and thank you for being with us. And the 4 principles of Cry Oneness: believe in miracles, don't lose heart, and use the narrow gate. And have a great day.
Thank you, Joe.
God bless you all.
Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
To a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.